Hi, I'm CJ and this is my RC channel. This was kind of a question I had early on. Three, they call them cloth style hinges. They're really, is it Kevlar, I think, hinges. Anyway, these are specifically for the rudder, and I'm almost definitely going to use these. Or I've also got some CA hinges of my own I may use. In this bag is a small piece of plastic. Let me see if I can get this down to where you can see it. Basically, it is the windscreen for the pilot that is not there. So I think you might be able to make that out. So don't throw that away or leave it in the bag. Let's see, we've got a bunch of screws. These are going to be for the wings and the servos, assorted. These small Z-bend rods are for the ailerons. I do not think I'm going to use the hardware they provide for linkages. I'm going to make my own linkages. They also provide these two carbon fiber tubes and these two metal rods, and this is a nice system. And if you don't have a better solution for yourself, these should do just fine for you. You're going to be putting these carbon fiber tubes in the fuselage. You may need to trim them a little bit, and they're going to go down these holes here and here, and they'll basically cross each other, and one will come out down here and the other one will come out down here. The rod, the carbon fiber isn't going to come out these two holes. The push rod will. You want the carbon fiber to end up somewhere just around like here or close to the aperture. But you need this to have a little bit of flex, and if you take this tube all the way out, that rod isn't going to be able to flex much. But I am not going to be using these, and I will explain why in just a moment. They are a little on the heavy side, and it's not that I'm trying to skimp on weight, because this is a chunky little lady, but the more weight in the tail, the harder it's going to be to balance this plane. And usually, like on a glider, let's say, weight is kind of like on a 3-to-1. A gram of extra weight in the tail requires about 3 grams in the nose to compensate. Because this plane has such a short nose, that ratio is probably a lot higher. And it might even be in the realm of 5 or 6 to 1. I don't know for sure, but I want to try to limit that as much as possible. And that's 10.5 grams of weight right there, just with these rods hanging off the back of the plane, rear of the CG. So what I'm probably gonna, well, what I'm definitely gonna do is, there's a lot of different solutions you could do. I have a good supply of thin carbon fiber rod and thin plastic tubing or Bowden tubing, and so I'm going to use probably 1mm carbon rods and this Bowden tubing to make my own push rods to the rear. I will almost definitely use the same guide holes in the various bulkheads, same as these would be run through to run this Bowden tubing, but it will yield a much lighter final result. I'm also not a big fan of Z-bends. there's nothing wrong with them, and they can work just fine. But they're not, you know, first off, the section where the horn is going to be is not always perpendicular. In fact, it's almost never perpendicular. You've always got to bend it back a little bit. And I like precision, and this is a small airplane. It's going to be twitchy, so I want there to be as much precision in this control system as possible. So I don't think I'm going to go with these. I'm probably going to go with some nice micro control or clevises that I have. Let me go ahead and pull a couple out and show you. These guys here I used recently in another kit, and they are fantastic. They're extremely precise. These little brass pins here snap in. These are actually a lathed piece, so they're extremely precise, and they're very light and perfect for the job at both ends of the control rod. And I have some threaded brass tubing that I can glue to the carbon fiber push rods. Let's see, there's a few other items. Yes, these little guys right here, if I don't use the brass tubes, I'll use these. This is another precise item. These came from Hyperflight, hyperflight.co.uk. I get a lot of stuff from them. It's a little expensive on shipping, but I think it's worth it. And also, there are some things that just other people don't sell. For example, they have really long lengths of carbon fiber rod and tubing, up to 1.5 meters. It's hard to find that kind of stock. There are other places that sell it, but I really haven't seen anyone that has the variety of size that Hyperflight offers. And since they focus on gliders, they have a lot of things like tapered tubing for like tail booms that's made out of wound carbon fiber, and they're extremely light. In fact, I've actually got one sitting here on the work table. You see, this goes from about 25 millimeters down to about 8. This piece here is a separate item. This is for a full flying stabilizer. So you bolt your stab on here and affix a rudder, and there's your tail section. This is for a custom build that I'm going to be doing. I actually got a couple of them in the works, and I will go over those in videos in the future. So anyway, back to this. I may be using these at the front, where I would do the adjustment at the servo. At the tail section, to save weight, I will probably just glue these onto the carbon rod directly and not have any other interface between the carbon and the clevis. That way, I mean, you only need to adjust it one end or the other. So, you know, save these parts for other things and just use these for the for one end of it. Cut it to the right size, and then you only need to do a little adjusting. These small clevises can be gotten at Hyperflight. In fact, I just ordered some yesterday because I need a bunch more for some other kits. I got these from Esprit Tech. They're located here in the United States. I believe they're down in Florida, and they have a lot of nice gear too, so check them out. I don't get any money or any I have no relationship with either of these companies other than really appreciating their customer service. In fact, Hyperflight has always been exceptionally nice. Those Brits are so polite, and they are really, really helpful. I had ordered a plane the other day and had changed my mind, and I had ordered it in the middle of the night, which is probably like somewhere around almost the beginning of their day, and I sent them an email, you know, in the morning, because I realized I'd wanted to go with a different kit. And no problem, they were actually in the process of boxing my order. They pulled the other kit, they swapped them, they sent me a little link so I could go on PayPal and pay the $5.30 difference between the two kits, and it was totally painless, and they were very nice about the whole thing and very helpful. So, you know, kudos to Hyperflight. You know, and if you're looking for some high-end gliders are, you know, they're okay here in the States. They're, you know, popular enough, but it's not as popular as it is over in Europe. And there's a lot of independent designers over in Europe, some of the Eastern European countries, Germany, for example. There's a lot of guys over there designing competition gliders, and you know, a lot of them are small run. You know, they'll have you know, maybe 100 or so of them built. Kits done a year, and Hyperflight carries a nice selection of those, and it's almost impossible to find otherwise. So if you're looking for a nice glider, if you've seen some of the 2-meter RES, rudder elevator spoiler gliders that I have built and am building, and you think that's a nice plane that you'd enjoy, I'm sure you would. I personally love gliders. I grew up flying them because gas was problematic for a young kid who doesn't have a car or a driver's license. You know, when you're 14 years old and you're flying out of the local school that you walk to with your radio control airplane, having to, you know, trek gas and a starter and everything else. Back then, RC was a lot more primitive, so gliders were just a natural thing to go to get maximum stick time. Okay, onward. Distracted there. There are a couple things that I didn't do earlier and kind of cleaned up on. I was talking about the wings, so I went ahead and finished the 2 ailerons. Let me just set these aside for the moment. And then I did clean up on the wings. Excuse me. There were a few things I had left for later, like putting in these little triangle braces here. There's a whole bunch of those, and there's basically one in each corner here, the rear corners on all the wings. There's these little balsa doublers that are going to be sanded to help shape this edge here. There's these little braces here to provide some structure for the covering of the wing tips, and those are at both ends and on all of the wings, as you can see. So I went ahead and put all of those in place. There's also these little balsa doublers that go at the tips. These are definitely not something you want to leave off. They're not a huge structural item, but they do provide a larger surface area for the end of the carbon fiber leading edge. And so you're going to have one at either end like that. Highly recommend going ahead and putting those on. So, need to take care of those. Another thing that I found a couple extra of in the kit is these 2 small rods. These are 175 millimeters. And if you recall, the 175s are for this section right here. This is the only place I've looked all over the plans. I thought maybe they were on, you know, like a leading edge for the stabilizer to make that a little stiffer. No, they're too big. They're not for anywhere else. I think that maybe people had broken a few of these when they were trying to get them through the holes of the fuselage here, and they decided to toss a couple extra in for you. There's no other reason for these to be here of this specific length. I have looked and looked and looked and cannot find any other purpose for them. So something to throw in a box for something else later down the road. There also was a couple of extra balsa ribs and a handful of these little half ribs. I've put every single one of them in. There are no doublers. There are no empty spaces. The wings are complete. I have triple checked, just to be sure that I'm not blind in one eye and unable to see out of the other, and somehow missed it. There's also, there's a couple of these that are for the top wing. There's a couple of one of these. So, I guess they just had some extra space and threw in a couple extra pieces in case you broke stuff. It's kind of, like I said, arbitrary which ones they chose. Like they chose these and to give you an extra 33. These are the ones that wrap around that curved portion of the middle wing where the pilot climbs in and out. Other than the fact that those get shaped is the only reason I can think they would put extras in. The extras are the A1s and the A2s, things like that. Another thing there's a couple extra of, we have these W2s and we have some W1s, and these are going to be used, and I will demonstrate this when I get to that part. These are for the little servo trays. Okay, and you're going to put a W2 into this small notch, and you're going to put a W1 below it, basically, and provide the mounting points for the servo. Now, I recommend doing this with a servo in hand. You don't want to rely on those notches because depending on the servo you're using, they may not fit. In fact, depending on the size of this, you definitely want to choose a very small servo. The servos I had planned to use, I may end up going with something even smaller. They don't need to be very powerful. I did want to put something fairly strong in there. These ailerons have a decent amount of surface to them, and I want this plane to have the potential to pull some hard rolls, be a little aerobatic. I don't know how well that's going to go. We'll see once it's airborne how well these fly. And the triplane is a notoriously tricky plane. That's one of the reasons that I am using a receiver with safe and AS3X stabilization technology built into it. So I can basically set up AS3X to give me a nice envelope of flying without getting into too much trouble, and I can have I can have safe set up basically as a panic button. So if I really get out of control, I can flip one switch on the transmitter, let it go into safe mode, let it regain and find level flight on its own. And that's also a great thing to have if you lose sight of the plane for a second, to just flip it into safe and let it find level flight and cruise instead of finding its way to the ground on you. So some other things to show you. The tail skid, I'm kind of doing small stuff now, doing a little cleanup into the final stages of the build. Well, we're a long way from really final, but the big stuff is done. The wings are assembled, the fuselage is mostly assembled, the tail section's assembled. They give you 2 of these plywood tail skids, and they give you a pair of carbon caps to put on either side. And that will, once those are glued together, that's going to be a nice sturdy piece. But the hole in the back of the fuselage is not big enough for 2. They gave you a spare tail skid, of all things, as if you're ever going to use a spare one, because if you destroy this, you're going to destroy the 2 carbon fiber caps, and they don't give you extras of those. So it's just big enough to squeeze this in. And I'm glad I come from the school of test fit before you build. If I had gone ahead and said, oh yeah, this is no problem, just grabbed a couple of these out, slapped some glue on it, had my big fat tail skid, and then gone to my fuselage, and it's like, oh, well, that's not going to fit. and I would have had to, you know, cut this hole larger, and, you know, so good lesson to learn there. Always check stuff. I've still got to take care of this hatch. That's on the list as well. And of course the landing gear straps. The landing gear straps, it looks like they give a couple of extras, and I think the purpose of giving you more than one is to double them up. And I may even, I've thought about like running up to the hobby store and see if I can find some plastic landing gear straps, because I think Dupro makes some, and or take some aluminum and cut some straps and drill some holes in it. The carbon fiber will probably work fine, but I'm definitely going to double stack two of them and probably glue them together, not just, you know, put one above the other and bolt them down. Actually glue them into a single thicker piece and hopefully add some strength there. We'll see how that goes. If they break at some point, that's the only reason I'm thinking about changing this. If they break after takeoff, it could make for a very problematic flight and or landing, because if they break during, like, you're rolling out and, you know, one of them cracks and your gear's hanging, you know, you may not fly the plane well at that point. You know, balance goes to hell, things like that. Or if it breaks, you know, on landing, you know, that could, you know, damage the plane quite nicely too. Okay, on to the tail. Something I didn't do earlier, and I couldn't see it because I had laid this piece of balsa down here on top of my plans, and I hadn't found these two pieces, and that is T8 and T9. Fortunately, I saw them in the wood sections and set them aside to deal with later, and so these need to just be pressed in here and then glued. So I will be doing that shortly. That is going to add a little more structural strength to the intersection of the horizontal stabilizer. So covered that. The wheels are one of the things to be putting together, and I'll be doing that also in a few minutes. You want to use all three of these wooden pieces. There's 3 per wheel, plus the carbon fiber, you know, hubcap or whatever you want to call it, and you have a pair of these little carbon tubes. These are going to be a they're going to go through here, and they will give your axle something smooth to run on. And I recommend, when you're doing these, find the tightest hole and make that one of your outer ones. Like, that is very stiff. So that'll be one of the ones that I lock in. And it also looks like this tube is big enough to hang out a teeny bit to either side, and that is exactly what I would recommend doing. It's not going to be much. It's going to be like a 1/2 millimeter, but try to have a little bit at either end, more so to the inside if you have to do it. If you don't think there's a lot, make it flush here on the hubcap, because this is going to run up against the wheel lock, whereas this is going to go to the inside of the fuselage, so that'll keep the wheel away from the wooden wing and less chance of the tire rubbing. That's a good way to help, you know, make the plane take a spill on landing, is if the wheel, you know, kicks over and hits the wood, grabs and locks the tire for a moment and makes the plane, you know, want to kick to one side. You know, not necessarily fatal, but could mess it up a bit. Excuse me for a minute, I have to blow my nose. So, a lot of little things to do at this stage, and I'm going to cover all of it for you. And so I'm going to go ahead now, and I'm going to do the tail here. I'm going to do the wheels. Yes, the motor. These are the 4 pieces that are going to make up the motor mount, and the motor actually is designed to sit inside this box here. I don't know if you remember from the beginning of the video where I laid out all the main pieces that I was going to be using as far as controls and such. I'm using a slightly larger motor than recommended. It's the same diameter. It's a little chunkier though. It's probably a little bit longer, and it's a slightly higher torque motor, same KV. And I was leaving this for last because I wanted to make sure that I had the right distance to the nose cone so that the propeller wasn't sticking out, you know, too far, looking weird, in case I needed to make adjustments to this or how I mounted it. But since the motor mounts from behind here and there's a lot of space back here, that's not going to be an issue. So if you want to get a little more performance out of yours and put in a slightly bigger motor than is recommended, there's no problem with that. You might even be able to go with a larger diameter motor. I would use caution because in real life these planes were never designed to be rocket ships. So you want to try to kind of keep this flying a little more gently, a little more docile, and also because it has a very short wingspan, and that was the original intent of the designers when they designed this in Germany back in pre-World War I, was to use 3 instead of 2 wings that were shorter, and thus the plane could maneuver much more quickly. And of course the downside being that it's a very finicky plane to fly, and notoriously so. So putting too much motor in this plane with too much torque could get you into trouble, because you could wind it up, and instead of making the plane go fast forward, it, you know, makes it roll suddenly on you. So things to consider. It's up to you. I mean, you know, your plane, do as you wish. So yeah, and these little tubes here, they're pretty snug. They're not super snug, so I would, now that I'm thinking about it, I'm gonna make this flush to the front on the carbon hubcap here, and I'm gonna leave as much of this tube out the rear as possible. I might even drop a few washers in between this and the wing here to try to make sure the wheel is as far away from here as possible without, you know, looking ridiculous or something. I'm not going to go overboard with it. And another thing that's going to be coming up here soon is starting to paint some stuff. I'm going to want to spritz these a bit, try to get some paint in through those holes there. It's too, you know, it's nice that they assembled these for you, but it's kind of a pain, because how are you gonna paint that, you know, the inner wood section? I would recommend short bursts and short spray sessions, just a little bit at a time. Don't be too close, and just work it a little bit at a time. Let it dry, you know, see how it's taking and whatnot, and, you know, hit it again. Better to do a little bit at a time and not overkill and destroy it. Also, this I'm not sure if that's like a paper or a plastic that wraps around there. In the original designs I saw for another similar kit, it's actually like a paper. And yeah, it feels plasticky, but it's really thin. I mean, you can squish it with your fingers. So you know, who knows how volatile, how much this could be attacked by paint. I fortunately have some Lexan safe paint, polysafe paint, the kind of stuff that you use to paint RC car bodies. That will not attack this plastic. And I think I've got some gunmetal colored as well as some black, so I'll probably do a mixture of that. It's also going to be time to start doing the same thing with the faux motor here, spritzing this with some gunmetal and some black, do a mixture, try to make it, you know, look a little aged kind of thing. Again, something I wish they almost hadn't put together for you, because getting the paint into all these angles and stuff is going to be tough without saturating it, and you definitely don't want to do that. You'll need to glue the tires on. This is looks like a closed cell foam, so you could probably use CA. Might be better to go with epoxy. Epoxy would give you a lot more time to work with, and you don't have to worry about it having too much in one space if this is open cell, and have it hardening it. So, you know, a light coat of epoxy here, a light coat on the wheel, slide it over the wheel, press it flat against a tabletop, and use the table surface to basically true the tire to the wheel. You know, put it hubcap down, and just like that, and then let it dry. That's probably how I'll do that. So anyway, I will show everything to you however I do it, as I do it, as usual. So from here, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to take care of the stab. I'm going to go ahead and take care of this little guy here, get the skid done, toss that extra piece aside, motor mount, wheels, and then start working on those aileron servos. And then it's going to be time to start doing linkages, mounting the ESC, mounting a strap for the battery. They provide some Velcro. I am not going to use this. I would prefer to have a strap that is has a loop and pulls back onto itself, so you can tighten it against the battery, so wherever you put the battery, it doesn't move forward or backwards. They may have given you this with the intent of gluing this down and then gluing some to the battery. I don't know, or maybe they expect you to somehow make this into a strap. It is my experience that Velcro doesn't like to glue to anything, and I've tried CAs and epoxies and all kinds of stuff, and this stuff is almost impervious to glue. If any of you guys know a good glue for Velcro, please put a comment, let me know. I'll pass that information on to everybody. I have glued down many a battery strap only to have it, you know, pull right back up again. So love to have some ideas. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please click like, please subscribe to my channel.